I like that. That is good. All right, so now I got some times for questions. Genesis, the fall, there's a fair bit in it. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask about what we heard or thought about today? Rob.
Samuel, the text implies by saying that the serpent is cursed among all the animals. Does that mean that other animals are cursed or all animals are cursed?
It's got to do with relative language, and I did look at that fairly closely, and no, the language is just, of all the animals you've got it, you are the worst. You are the one with the judgment is going to be laid upon. So no, it doesn't mean that all animals are cursed specifically. We do know that creation itself is suffering under the curse of the fall. And so, yes, there's disease and sickness even amongst the animals. But specifically, the intent of that phrase is, no, you've got it. You're the one who's ruined. But remember, the snake represents lots of things. In that particular context, the snake is representing creation itself. So yes, creation is cursed. But when we see the snake, the lesson for us is to see the snake's humiliation, the abject humiliation of having to crawl on its belly and eat dust. When we see the snake, the author has seen in that posture everything in God's curse over creation for what Adam and Eve have done. So yeah, it doesn't mean that the other animal, in that particular context, specific to the snake, but the snake has symbolic representation for the rest of creation. Good question. Any other questions? Prue, go for it.
Not a question, but an observation. It seems that many Koori Christians are beginning to recognise in their rainbow serpent that snake, that evil, the representation of Satan.
I certainly wasn't aware of that. The important thing for First Nation people is to recognise the fall has affected every culture, every community. And in the dreaming, we have a narrative which is rebelling against the narrative of the gospel. And so in that sense, the rainbow snake can become symbolic for a culture which is actually anti-gospel. And so I understand that. It'd be really important not to emphasize symbols over what the symbols are meant to teach. And so, yeah, Prue, definitely if the rainbow is symbolic of the part of the culture which is rebelling against God, then that makes sense. Yes, the snake is the symbol of human rebellion against God, chaos, evil, choosing good and evil for ourselves, a worldly wisdom as opposed to a godly wisdom. So as long as we understand that's a symbol which represents something, not the thing itself.
Mm.
Yeah. Yep, good point.
Just wondering if the tree is a test.
Okay, great question. Is the tree a test in itself? With the whole concept of the tree represents the capacity of humanity to rebel against God. So God didn't put the tree there to test the obedience of Adam and Eve. The capacity to rebel against Adam and Eve occurs simply because God gave us the capacity to serve him of our own free will. And so as soon as you create something good, comes the possibility of that good thing being corrupted or used in an inappropriate way or sought after in an inappropriate way. So God is not deliberately testing Adam and Eve. The scriptures tell us later in the epistles, God does not tempt. The scripture itself is very clear that God never deliberately tempts people to sin. However, just as godly authority is a good thing, and suddenly you've got the capacity to rebel against that authority. So if you think about the knowledge of good and evil, that's that capacity for humans to choose for themselves right and wrong, as opposed to allowing God to decide what is right and what is wrong. So no, the scripture is super clear. Great question. Really good question. We often think, oh, that's a bit unfair. It's like putting candy in front of a kid and telling them they're not allowed to eat it. Whereas the whole picture of Genesis is that God's given them absolutely everything. They're just superabundance of all this stuff that they've been given. The only thing they were told not to do was to rebel against the very one who gave them everything.
One thing just before that, very quickly
Sure.
though, is the knowledge of good and evil the genesis or explanation for a conscience?
No. So Adam and Eve should have known they were complete and whole. So a conscience is that part of us which directs our moral decisions.
And so that was there, the conscience was there in the perfect, but that in a sense says you have a knowledge.
That's right. But it's knowledge of good and evil. With that knowledge of good and evil, there's a sense of the tree, it's not magic. The tree doesn't magically give them a capacity. The taking of the fruit represents a choice of Adam and Eve to choose for themselves what's right and wrong. So all rebellion is us as humans saying to God, we are going to determine what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So the story is the failure, to act on that knowledge of right and wrong.
The story is the failure of Adam and Eve to act on what they knew was good, allowing God to determine the boundaries of our moral behavior and choosing for themselves what the boundaries of moral behavior are.
Right.
So rather than letting God choose what is good and wrong, right and wrong, they said, no, we are now going to choose what is right and wrong. So when an authority says, obey me, do this, when we say yes, what we're saying is, you have the right to tell me what to do. You have the right to say what is good and what is evil. When we rebel against authority, what we're saying is, now I know better than you. I'm going to choose what I get to do, not you.
Yep.
So Adam and Eve, in taking from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, are saying basically to God, we are now, in their rebellion, we are now going to determine what's right for us, not you. They're going to take that knowledge. I'm going to be the provider of knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah.
It's just an awkward way of phrasing it, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But what do they now know when they have rebelled against God? There's two things. Not only are they wise, knowing good and evil, because it's a lovely play on words, they now know what it is to be good and they now know what it is to be evil, because their conscience tells them that they've done the wrong thing. They run away, they're ashamed, they're no longer guiltless.
Yeah.
But the knowledge they wanted was not to do evil, but to choose for themselves what is right and what is wrong.